Welcome, everybody. 6 o'clock Eastern. We start on time. Grateful, as I said, for everybody joining. Please, again, turn your cameras on if you would and your mics off, and we'll talk about where we are. Where am I physically? I'm in the Marriott, Courtyard Marriott Hotel, just off the lobby. This hotel is owned by Steve Dupree, former chair of the New Hampshire Republican Party, someone I've known a long time, and they were nice enough to give us this room because we plan to do this episode from the room just about 200 feet from here, where Donald Trump is going to be endorsed by Tim Scott in a couple hours. But they kicked us out for the security sweep because the Secret Service has guns and we don't. We left and we're able to find this space. Tonight, Tim Scott endorses Donald Trump. That's the biggest news of the day. I want to review, though, something from last night that occurred after we got two things that occurred last night after our session yesterday, and then talk about what I saw today and the reporting I've done. Last night, we talked about Nikki Haley's chances of winning this primary. We had Ed Goaz on saying he thought she still had a good chance. Others on the call were more skeptical. And we still had a lot of chatter in New Hampshire, which continued into today, about people being confused about Nikki Haley's schedule. Three things happened after we got off, actually. One was her campaign put out a very robust schedule in terms of the number of events, but the events themselves continue to baffle a lot of New Hampshire veterans. They're small events in diners and other places, not a lot of people, and they're pretty low energy. I could just say that. I was talking to Rick Santorum today about his events in 2012 when he came out of Iowa with a head of steam. Although he hadn't been declared the winner, he was very close, and he wasn't really competing that much in New Hampshire because this is not a great state for him. I covered a lot of his events. They were extremely high energy. They were like epic and gothic and intense. These events that Nikki Haley is doing, they are not intense, despite the closeness to the primary. So she put out a schedule. Number two, she went on CNN and said, she didn't say we want to win New Hampshire. She said, I want to do better than I did in Iowa. And the third thing was happened is I had dinner with a senior Trump campaign official who told me without bluster, they don't think there's any way they can lose this primary. They think it can be close if the turnout of independents, the contribution of the vote from independents is close to parity with Republicans, which has never happened. But they don't think they can lose the primary. So what's happened today? First thing I did was cover Nikki Haley event in a diner in Amherst. She did a gaggle with the reporters after she worked the diner, and she's the best I've seen her in the 2 days. She's very direct, very pointed, going after Donald Trump. Two things that I noticed and other people noticed. One is she continues to respond to all of Trump's allegations, and the Trump campaign official I had dinner with last night was laughing about how easily, from their point of view, they've gotten her into basically responding. So Trump hits her on Social Security. She defends her Social Security record. She lashes out at Trump. Trump hits her on immigration. Same thing. When you're defending, you're not on your message. The Trump people feel pretty good about that. But she was very good on that, the best I'd heard her. And she also was pretty intense in going after Trump and saying something that I didn't think she'd said before, but I don't cover it every day. But the other reporters who were there who do cover her said she had never said something along the lines that she said at the close of the gaggle, which was, the future of the Republican Party will be in jeopardy if Donald Trump is the nominee. Finished the gaggle. They asked her traveling press corps to get on the bus or the vans. When I'm in the traveling press corps, I don't leave my candidate. They all just got on the van. So she was still working the diner for a little bit. And there were a few other reporters with me kind of milling around. She then sat down and did in a kind of this cul-de-sac portion of the diner with News Nation to sit and do a joint interview with Chris Sununu. And I hovered to listen to the interview. And I was standing there hovering. So I see if she made any news, see how she was doing. I love the exchange with her and Chris Sununu. My sense is sometimes she chased a little bit when he answers for her, when she'd rather be the one answering. And that happened a couple times. And I'm interested in that. Just kind of an interesting dynamic between the two of them. It's extremely supportive of her. And while I was standing there, I saw the tweet on my phone from one of the two New York Times reporters who broke the story that Tim Scott was going to endorse Nikki Haley. I sent you all an email earlier today with my analysis of that endorsement. I think it's as big an endorsement as Donald Trump could get. The official I had dinner with last night, I asked him about Tim Scott's endorsement, where that stood, and it was not fully forthcoming. So I didn't have any idea it was coming today. As I have reported, I believe, on one of these Zooms, they are sitting on more endorsements. And after Tuesday, whether win or lose, you're going to see almost certainly more endorsements that they've been sitting on unfurled. This is obviously devastating for her because it'll drive at least a news cycle and a half. Unless she comes up with something big or there's some external event, this is a big story. And the event tonight will be higher energy, I think, than her diner stop. And so when she stood up from the interview with News Nation, the crew I'm working with here, we just got separated. They were in a different part of the diner. And so I used my iPhone to shoot, and I asked her how she felt about how her campaign would be impacted. And I want to show you her reaction. This tweet has gotten more attention than my tweets usually get, and perhaps you'll see why. It's her only on-camera reaction that I know of to the endorsement of Donald Trump by Tim Scott. Go ahead and play that clip.
Governor, the New York Times says that Tim Scott's endorsing Donald Trump tonight. What would that mean to your campaign?
We'll wait and see if it happens.
Have you talked to him lately?
All right, so take it back to about 8 seconds. The part of why the tweet, even though her answer was kind of a nothing answer, put the video back up if you can. Part of why it's gotten so much attention is not the substance of what she said, which was, of course, not particularly interesting. But go to 8 seconds here, and you'll see this look that some people on the web have characterized as a little bit like deer in the headlights. I'm not sure what that red stuff over her face is, but in any event, that's still image, that screen grab has been retweeted by a lot of people, mostly Trump supporters. Oh, I see somebody's messing with this. Okay, take that down, figure out who's doing that. So that happened to her. That was this endorsement, a big blow to her. And then shortly after that, the Daily Mail ran a story claiming new evidence, quote unquote, of the longstanding accusations she faced back to her gubernatorial run of a couple of extramarital affairs. And I'm happy to talk about it when we get to Q&A here. I do know that this is widely viewed by almost everyone I've talked to today who's in politics as a turtle on a fence post. Why is the Daily Mail running this story right at this moment, 100 hours before the primary? Donald Trump's story his big story is the Tim Scott endorsement. The Nikki Haley big story is dealing with this Daily Mail piece. She, according to the Daily Mail, they've now been barred from all of her events. So I don't know much about politics, but I know you don't want to be at war with the Daily Mail. And I know, secondly, that whatever engineered the timing of that story was probably not a massive coincidence. So we can talk more about that. Left the Haley event, went to Ron DeSantis press conference scheduled for 3:30 at St. Anselm College in Goffstown. I was eager to ask him a question or two. And shortly before the event, they sent out a new advisory saying that the event was not going to be inside at St. Anselm, but outside the hockey arena. So I assumed there'd be some way to make that a tolerable experience. There were a lot of reporters there. I was surprised at the number of reporters there, including some big feet reporters like Dan Balls of the Washington Post, Steve Peoples of AP. And we were there for over 45 minutes in the cold. Put up the tweet if you would. It wasn't just us who were waiting in the cold. It was about 12 degrees. It was also some of his supporters, including some kids. And so the CBS reporter tweeted out this picture. You cannot tell from that two-dimensional picture how cold it was, but people were really cold. And as she pointed out, it wasn't just the press complaining. It was also his supporters. You can take the tweet down. We waited as long as we could. I ended up doing a live TV shot from there about my Nikki Haley video. And then we had to go because he wasn't there, and we wanted to make sure we didn't miss the Trump event. While everybody was waiting, the campaign staff, it was actually not campaign, but the super PAC, because he was appearing as a special guest of his own super PAC at his own press conference, which is, once again, I think, flouting the limits of the law. They kept saying he's about to arrive. He'll be here any minute. It's just a matter of moments. And then someone, I don't know how they found out or noticed, someone noticed he was live on Fox, I think from WMUR, which is about 10 minutes from St. A's. And that was super unfortunate as far as I was concerned, because it meant he wasn't coming, and it meant they weren't really being truthful with us. And it meant we sat freezing for over 45 minutes for no reason. Enough pity on me and the folks I'm working with. We got in the car, we drove to the Trump event. So we're waiting for the Trump event tonight. It's supposed to start in about an hour. I suspect it will not start till much later than that. But my sense of things is, as I said, the Scott endorsement is a big deal. It's one of the few endorsements that I would say really matter. One of the leading Black figures in the Republican Party, a former presidential candidate, gives Trump all three of the top elected officials in South Carolina, and it drives a day and a half of news stories here. And I'll be curious to see the interplay between them. when Vivek Ramaswamy endorsed Trump up here, he spoke for 8 minutes. I think you'd have to be a huge student of Donald Trump to know that 8 minutes is probably not Donald Trump's preferred length to listen to somebody else speak. I'll be curious to see how long Scott speaks and what he says. But, Mitch McConnell does not want Donald Trump to be the nominee, but Tim Scott is one of Mitch McConnell's favorites. And so this is a big get for Trump. And as I said, I expect more. So that's my sense of where we are. I'll be curious to see where the tracking poll is tomorrow. I don't know whether there are going to be other polls beyond this tracking poll that's done by the Boston Globe and the NBC station in Boston every day. But as I said, the combination of Nikki Haley no longer saying she's going to win, John Sununu no longer saying that, and their spin of all she needs to do is better than she did in Iowa. And the Trump campaign's expressed confidence to me that they can't lose at this point, that their floor is higher than Haley's ceiling, barring some huge influx of independents, means I think Trump's going to win this primary as of now. And as I've said before, although there are people who fantasize about different possibilities, I really do think if Trump wins this primary by more than a point or two, he will be the de facto nominee, and we'll all be dealing with the implications of that. So I'm going to check to see if any of the folks I asked if they could make time to join us or people who just unexpectedly show up who I'd like to call on to get their point of view in the day. While I do that, I'll remind you, if you have a question, please come on camera, raise your electronic hand, a question or a comment. Love to hear from you about the day or answer any question you have about the day. And I will do my best to answer them. And I see some people I would love to hear from. But let's start by asking folks. Again, if you got a question, Charles, I see you have your hand up. So Charles, go ahead and ask. I've asked you to unmute yourself. Go ahead and do that and ask away.
Hey, Mark. First off, I really, really enjoy every appearance you have on Michael Smercash's program. Keep doing it for as long as you can.
Okay. Until Michael fires me, I'll be there every Wednesday at 10 o'clock Eastern.
So now, given your analysis of Nikki's path or almost sure loss, are you going to put her in the same basket as, let's say, DeSantis's path? They're just in the business of aggregating delegates in case Trump gets convicted?
Well, I think that's what DeSantis is up to. And because his super PAC supporters, some of them, I think will stay with him. He may stay in. And again, this is his theory of the case. He's assuming she gets out after she loses here or after she loses South Carolina, assuming she loses them both. And that he can just be the guy who stays in and grinds out delegates. She may choose that path too. We don't know that yet. She's not in that same position. Because Iowa gave her permission to go forward and the state gives her permission to vote. So if she loses New Hampshire, I actually think today, with imperfect information, I actually think today he's more likely to be the backup to Trump if something makes Trump unable to be the nominee than she is. Because I think he's more likely to just go with that strategy. But it's a close call because neither of them have much of a chance, I think, in that circumstance.
Yeah, respect.
Okay. Say again?
I respond. I didn't know if I'm entitled to a response.
Of course, please.
So, I mean, we already know she denied the no labels ticket, and DeSantis definitely denied the VP ticket. So, if not going for the number 2 slot, where do you think her eyes are set on?
Well, I'll tell you something today that happened that to my ear was news, and I know at least one other reporter felt the same way. She gets asked all the time about VP, and she says, "I'm not running for number 2. I'm not interested in that, etc." In a conversation with voters, 2 people at a diner table, she was Sherman-esque about vice president with running with Trump. And I don't know that it matters because, you can be Sherman-esque and change your mind. But she ruled it out. There was no cuteness about her ruling it out with these 2 voters who asked her about it. And one of them urged her to do it. And she just said, I will not. She said something like, I will not be Donald Trump's vice presidential nominee. So what's she going for? I think she's seeing if she can't have a breakthrough to be the nominee this year. I think, one thing that's not been discussed that much is whoever Trump picks as his running mate has a big leg up for 28, almost certainly, unless he goes with the Cheney model. Right. But she could be in that mix. And I think, she wants to be president. She's young. She could run for 10 more cycles or 5 more cycles at least. I want to thank you for that question. I want to call on Tom Rath, who's nice enough to have joined us. Tom is a longtime political Republican in this state and knows a lot about New Hampshire primaries. Tom, thank you for joining us. If you can unmute, Tom, I've asked you to. If you can lean in there and unmute. Thank you, Tom, for joining us. Just tell everybody you've supported lots of winning and losing candidates in this primary before. Just tell everybody the history of where you are now. Have you supported anyone in this primary, or are you remaining neutral?
No, I'm happily an observer from the sidelines. Other than I think it would be fair to characterize me both personally and publicly as not terribly fond of Donald Trump. So,
yeah. What? Given you, it's not your preference he win the primary. What's your sense of whether he will win the primary?
Well, I mean, all the data seems to suggest that. I don't know. I have sensed a little bit of the New Hampshire idea that it's not over till we talk and vote. And I think looking at the change in registrations, the biggest gain in any group in registrations in advance of the primary has been undeclared. So that puts a fair amount of folks into this mix that it's a little bit harder to poll. I agree with you, Mark. If it's for all, it's good to see you too. If the data is to be agreed on at all, the energy has been with the Trump people, and to their credit, they have never stopped working, and they have complete and total control of the party apparatus of the state, such as it is. Even though Chris Sununu is highly popular and very good, but he has basically ceded that to them. So it seemed to me, if you had to pick a winner right now, I would say it would be Trump. I don't know by what margin. I think there is something occurring here that I have not regularly seen, and it may be because of the new primary schedule, is that there is an awful lot of coalescing behind Nikki Haley, not people who necessarily might have chosen her first, but she has the amount of people that are for her to be with her is impressive. But more importantly, is she getting the anti-Trump vote? And I think that may occur, and that's impressive. And I don't know how we measure that. I think in terms of actual numbers, my suspicion is Trump will get more votes. She might get enough to be the story, if you will, that she runs a competitive race.
Yeah, particularly if her number is better than the final tracking polls and polls.
That's right.
And Tom, something I tried to capture for folks about the lack of enthusiasm in the media, in people here, and outside activists. The Secretary of State, I believe, is predicting a pretty high turnout. I'm skeptical. And I think I mentioned last night I got a hotel room in Manchester without, on one day's notice, which would never have happened in the past. Do you have any quantitative or qualitative way, if you agree with my premise, coverage on MWMUR, lack of people asking you about it, to back up my point of view that there's just not the level of intense interest that there normally would be in a New Hampshire primary?
I think that's fair, Mark, from a distance. On the other hand, on the ground, it has really ramped up in the last couple of weeks. And it may be tied up to the Patriot quarterback situation, but whatever it is, there's a lot more attention being paid to this now. Some of the scenes today were reminiscent of the old days, as we say, although nobody's hanging out at the Wayfarer. But it's there's a growing amount of attention being paid to this, and it really has very little to do with Nikki Haley. This primary is all totally and completely about Donald Trump. It defines it. It drives his vote, and it drives the anti-vote. There's not a lot of coalescing behind the Republican Party. This is not going to be the Republican primary. This is going to be the Trump primary. And the party that's going to be remade is not the Sununu party, but it's the Trump party. I also say that don't underestimate the impact of Chris Sununu. He is one of the most gifted natural politicians I've seen that New Hampshire has produced in a long time. And one of the things about him is he really likes it. And the people out there like him. It's a real test of how much he can transfer that likability and that respect, I guess, over to Nikki Haley. It's a little bit of an odd mix, but I'll tell you, he has done everything you could want to do. As a governor, he's acting like an advanced man. He's setting up chairs. He's doing all the right stuff.
He is. He totally is.
That's the way governors typically have been going way back. And I keep thinking it shows what kind of a candidate he could have been had he decided to run for this.
Yeah, I totally agree with
you. If she can stop Trump or slow Trump anywhere, it's got to be here. and it's got to be because of Sununu. I'm not convinced that's going to happen, but if it does, this is the spot, and now is the time.
I agree with you. He's playing a role bigger than almost any governor I've ever seen as an endorser. And at the diner today, two of his constituents said, after warmly greeting Governor Haley and talking about how excited they were, two separate people at two separate tables turned to Chris Sununu and said, "I wish you were running. You would have won. You would have beaten Trump." Right. Tom, if you can stay with us, I'd love it, because I know there would probably be questions that you can answer far better than I can. So thank you. Colin, I'm going to ask you to unmute. And thank you. Ask you to unmute and comment or question. And if you want to direct it to Tom, you'd be smart. Go
ahead. Thanks, Mark. Just an observation. Back in 2016, my recollection is there were a lot of what were called suburban housewives who didn't want to vote for Trump, decided, I think, not to vote for Hillary. But there was all this enthusiasm. Like Democrats had a female on the ballot. And in 2020, my recollection was that one of the reasons Trump didn't do as well was because so many of these women didn't want to vote for him. And yet, in all of these sessions, I haven't heard anyone talk about the fact that Haley's a woman, and that you have a woman who appears to be relatively stable, capable, experienced, who's potentially the next president, and yet I haven't heard a word of that.
Yeah, Colin, it's a great point. And again, I've only covered her on the ground here for 2 days. I see a lot of her events. I didn't hear a single woman say the kind of thing I used to hear Hillary Clinton told all the time. I didn't see anybody say to her, my daughter, this is so great. I'm sure it happens. I've never heard of it. You haven't seen much of the coverage tilted that way. Nothing like with Hillary, in part because she eschews identity politics to some extent. Chris Sununu, I was told by one of his friends yesterday who was at one of the events, posited, and I think there's reason to think this, he has a better feel for female suburban voters than almost any politician in the country right now. He just gets what's important to them. And I think he's been working with Nikki Haley to talk to them about that. But you put your finger on an important thing, which is she's not seemingly, I'm sure she's going to get a lot of female votes. I'm sure she's going to get a lot of suburban female votes, but she's certainly not cast herself as or is generally talked about as by voters or the press as the notion of what this could be an historic first. And, you can argue about whether that's a mistake on her part or not, but it's certainly not part of her shtick at all. Now, part of the reason for that could be, as most everybody on here knows, Donald Trump has made a big issue of her saying things over the years about being inspired by Hillary Clinton. And maybe she just wants to avoid that at all costs, because that's certainly a good line. Question from Jill Abramson. Jill, unmute, please, and ask your question. Wait, hold on, Jill. You're still muted.
Okay.
Try again.
Okay, now?
There you go. Hear you now, Jill.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Hi,
yes.
everyone.
Thank
I
you for joining
actually
again.
think that her Trump is chaos message is aimed squarely at independent women voters. And
I agree.
It's a very smart way, rather than, pandering, to go after independent women voters.
Totally agree. And I'm sure that's part of the logic of it. It's just, like I said, I don't see in the rooms over the last 2 days, I don't see a disproportionate number of women heads nodding when she says that. I just haven't seen it. But I agree with you, on paper that should be, and I'm sure it's having some impact exactly along the lines you say. Tom, do you have a view of that for Jill?
Well, yeah, one thing, Mark, is you got to remember you're in New Hampshire. And in New Hampshire, women candidates are very popular, and they're not the exception. They're the norm. We have 2 women senators. We have 2 member of Congress. We've had lots and lots of very effective women politicians, and we're probably
and in the state legislature too. You've had
and we're going to elect. I'm certain one of the women that are running will be the next governor. So that's a plus here, and I believe you don't run as the woman candidate because that's basically a given to how our politics have run for the last 20 years. So, But I think the fact that you are does allow her to stand out. But I think it's a plus for her. I do think it's a plus for her on the Republican side.
Yeah, and Jill, I think your point is very true. That's clearly her main line, and it clearly has appeal for a lot of suburban women who don't like the chaos of Donald Trump and appreciate the contrast. Let me ask Jeff to come in. I'll ask you to unmute Jeff and ask your question or make your comment.
Thanks, Mark. I'm not a huge fan of Nikki Haley, but the naked misogyny of what's going on in this campaign really troubles me when I see people making a big deal about this Daily Mail story. And she's running against a guy that was found liable of sexual assault and rape and faces 91 felony indictments. Yet, because she's a woman, people are making a big deal over her supposed extramarital affairs, which I could care less about. And it just shows me how far we have to come when women are treated in that fashion. I find it really disturbing.
Yeah. Jeff, I'm going to agree with you 50% and disagree with you 50%. The 50% I agree with you on is no one has figured out exactly why Donald Trump gets away with stuff that others can't. Bill Clinton was the same way. There's just a dynamic that allows him to get away with stuff. And that's unfair because, as you said, he's been convicted of and found liable for things and caught on tape doing things worse than the accusations against Nikki Haley. The part I disagree with you about, and I feel pretty confident I'm right, but I'd love Jill and Tom and others to weigh in if you wish, is I think if that Daily Mail story was about a male candidate, it would be getting a lot more attention. And if these are not new allegations, the Daily Mail purports to have new information. But I think if a male candidate had faced those kind of accusations, it would have come up a lot in the context of the campaign. I think she's actually benefiting from a double standard as a woman in the terms of how much it's been covered up until now, and even how much it's been covering today. I doubt it will be in the major papers. I doubt the Washington Post and New York Times will write about the Daily Mail story. And I doubt she'll be asked about it in TV interviews. And if she were a man, I think she would be. Tom and Jill, agree, disagree?
Well, I'll just jump in quickly. Women candidates are the norm here. They're not the exception. So you don't have to begin the sentence by saying the woman who's running for governor. That's who runs for governor. So I think our acceptance, even though we're kind of crusty and Yankees, the acceptance and reliance upon women in the body politic is strong here. And I don't think that's a plus or a minus for her. I think it's just who she is. The other story, the Daily Mail story, if you walked up to 20 people on Main Street in Concord, maybe one might have heard something on their iPhone. It just hasn't gotten the publicity or the grasp that it might other places.
Before I ask Jill to tell me why I'm wrong, if she wants to, besides that very demonstrative thumbs down, do you agree with me, Tom, that if that Daily Mail story was about a male candidate, be more likely they'd be asked about it?
Say it again, Mark. I'm sorry.
If that Daily Mail story was about a male candidate for president, do you think it's more likely they get?
Absolutely, it would be a much, much bigger story, particularly if that male was running as the model husband. I mean, you got to go against what the mind is. I mean, I think Haley's got the issue in this race is Trump. I have to keep going back. It's Trump, pro or con. It's Trump. She meets all the minimal steps and beyond that as someone who is the alternative. But that's what it is. It's Trump or it's her. And I don't think those secondary factors really matter in this discussion right now.
Jill, do you want to respond more to what I've said?
I'll put on my old editor of the New York Times hat and have looked at this story. There is nothing new based on affidavits that are 13 years old from two once political allies of Haley's who say they had affairs with her. If those were the same circumstances, nothing new, old affidavits, whether man or woman, that's not getting into the news report of the New York Times. No way, no how.
Whether it's a man or a woman?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'll be curious to see who writes about it. And I take Tom's point. I doubt people are talking much about it, although the Daily Mail has a lot of traffic. I know there are two hands up, but I really do want to end on time, half an hour tonight. So Robert and Rudolph, thank you. I hope you'll come back and ask questions. I'm going to go into the Trump event now and cover that and maybe update folks. There will be hopefully a way for folks who joined late or missed it and want to share this session with others to have a link to the video. Hopefully we can get that out before too long. Grateful to you for joining. We will be back certainly before Tuesday, and we are planning Tuesday night to have primary coverage the way we did for Iowa caucus night And I'm hoping that we've ironed out some of our technical issues, so you'll enjoy it, hopefully even more than those of you who joined on last Monday to watch primary coverage with us. Stand by for the details of that, of when we'll be on and who will be joining us. Thank you for joining us on a Friday night. Really grateful. Tom, thank you. Jill, really appreciate your input as always. And we will be back with you soon, both by email and here on Zoom for two-way. So thank you again. Have a great night.